Book 10, Line 1. The story of Orpheus in Hades. From there, Hymen, clad in his saffron robes, was summoned by Orpheus, and made his way across the vast reaches of the sky to the shores of the Cyclopes. But Orpheus' invitation to the god to attend his marriage was of no avail, for though he was certainly present, he did not bring good luck. His expression was gloomy, and he did not sing his accustomed refrain. Even the torch he carried sputtered and smoked, bringing tears to the eyes, and no amount of tossing could make it burn. The outcome was even worse than the omens foretold, for while the new bride was wandering in the meadows with her band of naiads, a serpent bit her ankle, and she sank lifeless to the ground. The Thracian poet mourned her loss. When he had wept for her to the full in the upper world, he made so bold as to descend through the gates of Taenarus to the Styx, to try to rouse the sympathy of the shades as well. There he passed among the thin ghosts, the wraiths of the dead, till he reached Persephone and her lord, who holds sway over these dismal regions, the king of the shades. Then, accompanying his words with the music of his lyre, he said, "Deities of this lower world, to which all we of mortal birth descend, if I have your permission to dispense with rambling insincerities and speak the simple truth, I did not come here to see the dim haunts of Tartarus, nor yet to chain Medusa's monstrous dog with its 3 heads and snaky ruff. I came because of my wife, cut off before she reached her prime, when she trod on a serpent, and it poured its poison into her veins. I wished to be strong enough to endure my grief, and I will not deny that I tried to do so, but love was too much for me. He is a well-known god in the world above. Whether he may be so here too, I do not know, but I imagine that he is familiar to you also, and if there is any truth in the story of that rape of long ago, then you yourselves were brought together by love. I beg you, by these awful regions, by this boundless chaos, and by the silence of your vast realms, weave again Eurydice's destiny, brought too swiftly to a close. We mortals and all that is ours are fated to fall to you, and after a little time, sooner or later, we hasten to this one abode. We are all on our way here, for this is our final home, and yours the most lasting sway over the human race. My wife, like the rest, when she has completed her proper span of years, will, in the fullest of time, come within your power. I ask, as a gift from you, only the enjoyment of her, but if the fates refuse her a reprieve, I have made up my mind that I do not wish to return either. You may exult in my death as well as hers." As he sang these words to the music of his lyre, the bloodless ghosts were in tears. Tantalus made no effort to reach the waters that ever shrank away. Ixion's wheel stood still in wonder. The vultures ceased to gnaw Tydeus' liver. The daughters of Danaus rested from their pitchers, and Sisyphus sat idle on his rock. Then, for the first time, they say, the cheeks of the Furies were wet with tears, for they were overcome by his singing. The king and queen of the underworld could not bear to refuse his pleas. They called Eurydice. She was among the ghosts who had but newly come, and walked slowly because of her injury. Thracian Orpheus received her, but on condition that he must not look back until he had emerged from the valleys of Avernus, or else the gift he had been given almost reached the surface of the earth. Here, anxious in case his wife's strength be failing, and eager to see her, the lover looked behind him, and straightway Eurydice slipped back into the depths. Orpheus stretched out his arms, straining to clasp her and to be clasped, but the hapless man touched nothing but yielding air. Eurydice, dying now a second time, uttered no complaint against her husband. What was there to complain of but that she had been loved? With a last farewell, which scarcely reached his ears, she fell back again into the same place from which she had come. At his wife's second death, Orpheus was completely stunned. He was like that timid fellow who, when he saw the three-headed Cyparissis led along, chained by the middle one of his three necks, was turned to stone in every limb, and lost his fear only when he lost his original nature too, or, like Paulinus and hapless Letheia, once fond lovers, now stones set on well-watered Ida, all because Letheia was too confident in her beauty, while Paulinus sought to take her guilt upon his own shoulders and wished to be considered the culprit. In vain did the poet long to cross the Styx a second time, and prayed that he might do so. The ferryman thrust him aside. For 7 days, unkempt and neglected, he sat on the river bank without tasting food. Grief, anxiety, and tears were his nourishment. Then he retired to lofty Rhodope and wind-swept Hymeus, complaining of the cruelty of the gods of Erebus. 3 times the sun had reached the watery sign of Pisces that brings the year to a close. Throughout this time, Orpheus had shrunk from loving any woman, either because of his unhappy experience, or because he had pledged himself not to do so. In spite of this, there were many who were fired with the desire to marry the poet. Many were indignant to find themselves repulsed. However, Orpheus preferred to center his affections on boys of tender years, and to enjoy the brief spring and early flowering of their youth. He was the first to introduce this custom among the people of Thrace. On the top of a certain hill was a level stretch of open ground, covered with green turf. There was no shelter from the sun, but when the divinely born poet seated himself there and struck his melodious strings, shady trees moved to the spot. The oak tree of Cleonia and poplars, Phaethon's sisters, crowded round, along with Jupiter's great oak with its lofty branches, and soft lime trees and beeches, and the virgin laurel, brittle hazels, and ash trees that are used for spear shafts, smooth firs, and the holm oak bowed down with acorns, the genial sycamore, and the variegated maple, willows that grow by the rivers, and the water-loving lotus, evergreen box, slender tamarisks, myrtles double-hued, and viburnum with its dark blue berries. There was ivy, too, trailing its tendrils and leafy vines, vine-clad elms and mountain ash, pitch pine and wild strawberry laden with rosy fruit, waving palms the victor's prize, and the pine, its leaves gathered up into a shaggy crest, the favorite tree of Cybele, the mother of the gods, for her priest Attis exchanged his human shape for this, and hardened into its trunk. rest of the throng came the cypress, shaped like the cones that mark the turning point on the race course, though now a tree. It once was a boy, dearly loved by the god who strings both lyre and bow. This is the story. There was once a magnificent stag, sacred to the nymphs who live in the fields of Carthea, whose branching antlers cast deep shade over its head. These antlers gleamed with gold, and a necklace of precious stones encircling the animal's silky neck hung down over its shoulders. On its forehead swayed a silver charm, kept in place by fine leather straps, which it had worn since it was born, and pearls glistened in either ear close by its hollow temples. This stag was quite without fear, and, its natural timidity forgotten, used to visit people's houses and hold out its neck even to strangers to be stroked. But the person who was most attached to it was Cyparissis, the handsomest of the Saian boys. He used to lead it to fresh grazing or the waters of some crystal spring, and wove wreaths of different kinds of flowers to hang upon its horns. Sometimes he sat on its back like a horseman on his horse, and gleefully guided the animal's soft mouth this way and that by means of scarlet reins. One summer day at noon, when the curving arms of the shore-loving crab were being scorched by the heat of the sun, the stag was tired and lay down to rest on the grassy ground, finding coolness in the shade of the trees. There, Cyparissis unwittingly pierced it with his keen javelin. When he saw his friend cruelly wounded and dying, the boy resolved to die himself. Phoebus said all he could do to comfort him, chiding him and telling him that his grief should be moderate, in proportion to its cause. Still the boy groaned and begged, as a last gift from the gods, that he should be allowed to go on mourning forever. Now, as his blood drained away by reason of his endless weeping, his limbs began to change to a greenish hue, and the hair which lately curled over his snowy brow bristled and stiffened, pointing upwards in a graceful crest towards the starry sky. Sadly the god Apollo sighed. "I shall mourn for you," he said, "while you yourself will mourn for others, and be the constant companion of those in distress." Such was the grove which Orpheus had drawn around him, and now he sat in the midst of a gathering of wild creatures and a host of birds. He tested the chords of his lyre, striking them with his thumb, till his ear was satisfied that the notes they played, though different, were all in tune.
We now jump ahead into the many tales of Orpheus.
Book 10, line 238. As for the loathsome Poiatides, they dared to deny the divinity of Venus. The story goes that as a result of this, they were visited by the wrath of the goddess, and were the first women to lose their good names by prostituting themselves in public. Then, as all sense of shame left them, the blood hardened in their cheeks, and it required only a slight alteration to transform them into stony flints. When Pygmalion saw these women living such wicked lives, he was revolted by the many faults which nature has implanted in the female sex, and long lived a bachelor existence without any wife to share his home. But meanwhile, with marvelous artistry, he skillfully carved a snowy ivory statue. He made it lovelier than any woman born, and fell in love with his own creation. The statue had all the appearance of a real girl, so that it seemed to be alive. To want to move did not modesty forbid. So cleverly did his art conceal its art. Pygmalion gazed in wonder, and in his heart there rose a passionate love for this image of a human form. Often he ran his hands over the work, feeling it to see whether it was flesh or ivory, and would not yet admit that ivory was all it was. He kissed the statue and imagined that it kissed him back, spoke to it and embraced it, and thought he felt his fingers sink into the limbs he touched, so that he was afraid lest a bruise appear where he had pressed the flesh. Sometimes he addressed it in fluttering speeches, sometimes brought the kind of presents that girls enjoy, shells and polished pebbles, little birds and flowers of 1,000 hues, lilies and painted balls, and drops of amber which fall from the trees that were once Phaethon's sisters. He dressed the limbs of his statue in women's robes, put rings on its fingers, long necklaces around its neck. Pearls hung from its ears, and chains were looped upon its breast. All this finery became the image well, but it was no less lovely unadorned. Pygmalion then placed the statue on a couch that was covered with cloths of Tyrian purple, laid its head to rest on soft down pillows, as if it could appreciate them, and called it his bedfellow. The festival of Venus, which is celebrated with the greatest pomp all through Cyprus, was now in progress, and heifers, their crooked horns gilded for the occasion, had fallen at the altar as the axe struck their snowy necks. Smoke was rising from the incense, when Pygmalion, having made his offering, stood by the altar and timidly prayed, saying, "If you gods can give all things, may I have as my wife, I pray." He did not dare to say, "the ivory maiden," but finished, "one like the ivory maid." However, golden Venus, present at her festival in person, understood what his prayers meant, and as a sign that the gods were kindly disposed, the flames burned up 3 times, shooting a tongue of fire into the air. When Pygmalion returned home, he made straight for the statue of the girl he loved, leaned over the couch and kissed her. She seemed warm. He laid his lips on hers again, and touched her breast with his hands. At his touch, the ivory lost its hardness and grew soft. His fingers made an imprint on the yielding surface, just as wax of Hymettus melts in the sun, and worked by men's fingers is fashioned into many shapes, and made fit for use by being used. The lover stood amazed, afraid of being mistaken, his joy tempered with doubt, and again stroked the object of his prayers. It was indeed a human body. The veins throbbed as he pressed them with his thumb. Then Pygmalion of Paphos was eloquent in his thanks to Venus. At long last he pressed his lips upon living lips, and the girl felt the kisses he gave her, and blushed. Timidly raising her eyes, she saw her lover and the light of day together. The goddess Venus was present at the marriage she had arranged, and when the moon's horns had 9 times been rounded into a full circle, Pygmalion's bride bore a child, Paphos, from whom the island takes its name. Paphos, in turn, had a son, Cyparissis, who might have been considered one of fortune's favorites, if only he had not had a family. The story I am going to tell is a horrible one. I beg that daughters and fathers should hold themselves aloof while I sing, or if they find my songs enchanting, let them refuse to believe this part of my tale, and suppose that it never happened. Or else, if they believe that it did happen, they must believe also in the punishment that followed. If then nature such a crime to occur. I congratulate the people of Ismarus and our part of the world, and count this country happy to be so far from regions which produced such wickedness. The land of Panchaia may be rich in balsam, bear cinnamon and zeodary and many kinds of flowers, and exude incense from its trees, but it is not to be envied while it grows myrrh with the rest. A new tree was not worth so great a price. Even Cupid denies that it was his bow which wounded Myrrh, and defends his torches against so grievous a charge. One of the three sisters, armed with firebrands from the sticks and swollen snakes, breathed a blight upon her. It is a crime to hate one's father, but Myrrh's love was a crime worse than any hate. Suitors had gathered from all directions to seek her hand, and the youth of all the eastern world had come to vie with one another for the privilege of marrying her. Choose anyone of all their company, Myrrh, provided that one man can be excluded from their number. The girl realized what was happening to her and fought against her horrible desire. "What am I thinking of? What am I scheming?" she said to herself. "I pray to the gods in heaven, to the holy ties of love and duty that bind children to their parents, that they may put a stop to this wickedness and prevent me from crime, if indeed it is a crime. But is it? No fault can be found with this kind of love on the grounds that such affection is unnatural, for other animals mate without any discrimination. There is no shame for a heifer in having her father mount her. A horse takes his own daughter to wife. Goats mate with she-goats they have sired. And birds conceive from one who was himself their father. Happy creatures who are permitted such conduct. Human interference has imposed spiteful laws, so that jealous regulations forbid what nature itself allows. Yet there are said to be nations where sons wed their mothers, fathers their daughters, to enhance their devotion by doubling the bonds of love. Alas, that I had not the good fortune to be born there, and I have to suffer for the accident of my birthplace. But why do I keep harping back to this theme? Away with forbidden hopes. Cyparissis deserves my love, but as my father. So then, if I were not the daughter of that great king, I would be his bride. As it is, because he is already mine, can I not have him? Is my very closeness to him my misfortune? Would I be able to do more were I a stranger? Gladly would I go far away and leave my country, provided I could escape my guilt. But loving Cyparissis as I do, I am kept here by my wicked infatuation, so that I may be with him, look at him, speak to him, and touch and kiss him, if I do nothing more. Wretched girl, can you look forward to anything else? Do you realize the confusion you are creating in names and relationships? Will you be your mother's rival, your father's mistress? Will you be called sister to your son, mother to your brother? Have you no fear of the Furies with their black and snaky tresses, the sisters with whom those with guilty hearts perceive, brandishing cruel torches at their eyes and faces? Take heed, and while you are free from actual sin, do not nurse sinful thoughts, or trespass against mighty nature's laws by seeking an unlawful union. Granted that you wish for this, your position makes it impossible. Your father is a good man, who observes what is right, and oh, I wish he were in love with me. Cyparissis, meanwhile, when faced with such a throng of eligible suitors, did not know what to do, so he told the princess their names and asked her whom she wished to marry. At first she remained silent, gazing at her father, her mind in a turmoil and her eyes filled with warm tears. Cyparissis put this down to girlish modesty. Drying her cheeks and kissing her, he told her not to cry. Myrrh delighted all too keenly in the kisses he gave her. She sighed when he asked her what kind of husband she wanted, and said, "One like you." Not understanding what she meant, he praised her choice and said, "See that you are always as devoted to me." At the word devoted, the girl hung her head, conscious of her guilt. It was midnight, and mortal men lay relaxed in sleep, their cares forgotten. But Cyparissis' daughter was awake, consumed by a fire she could not quench. She renewed her frenzied prayers, now despairing, now ready to test her father's feelings, at once ashamed of her desires and eager to fill them. She did not know what to do, but just as a huge tree sways, uncertain which way to fall, watched anxiously from every side as it waits for the last blow of the axe which has already almost severed its trunk. So Myrrh's resolution, weakened by renewed attacks, veered unsteadily this way and that, and inclined in both directions. She could see no end for her love but death, no other respite from it. So she determined to die. She got up, intending to strangle herself with a noose, binding her girdle to the top of the doorpost. "Goodbye, dear Cyparissis," she whispered. "Understand the reason for my death." Then she fastened the cord around her neck, which was already drained of blood. Her murmured words, they say, reached the ears of the faithful nurse, who was keeping guard at the threshold of the girl's bedroom. The old woman rose and unbarred the door. When she saw Myrrh's preparations for suicide, she shrieked aloud, and all at one and the same instant beat her breast, tore her garments, and loosed her mistress' neck, tearing the noose apart. Only then had she the time to weep, to throw her arms round the girl and ask why she had tried to hang herself. Myrrh remained mute and silent. She kept her eyes fixed upon the ground, and grieved that she had been too slow and had been discovered in her attempt to put an end to her life. The old nurse insisted, uncovering her white hairs and baring her empty breasts. She begged the girl by the cradle of her infancy, by the first nourishment she had known, to tell whatever it was that was worrying her. But Myrrh turned away from her questions with a groan. The nurse was determined to find out the truth, and promised to do more than merely guard the secret safely. "Tell me," she said, "and let me help you. I am old, but not useless. If it is some spasm of madness that has upset you, I know someone who can cure that with charms and herbs. Or if someone has laid a spell on you, who will be cleansed by magic ritual. Again, if the anger of the gods is distressing you, their anger can be appeased by offerings. What else can I suppose to be the matter? Assuredly your home and its fortunes are safe and prospering. Your father and mother are alive and well." When Myrrh heard the name father, she sighed from the bottom of her heart. But even then, her nurse had no suspicion of her guilty secret, though she guessed it was some love affair. Stubbornly resolved to have her own way, whatever the trouble was, she begged her mistress to tell her about it. She held the weeping girl to her wrinkled breast, clasping her closely in trembling arms. "I know what it is," she said. "You are in love. Don't be afraid. You will find me always ready to help you. Your father will never know anything about it." At this, Myrrh, utterly distraught, tore herself from her nurse's embrace and flung herself on the bed, burying her face in the cushions. "Go away," she cried. "Please go away and spare my wretched modesty." When the nurse pressed for further, "Go away," she screamed, "or else stop asking what is upsetting me. It is sheer wickedness, the secret you are so anxious to know." The old woman shuddered. She stretched out her hands, trembling as much from fear as from age, and threw herself at Myrrh's feet, now coaxing, now frightening her as to what she would do if she were not allowed into the secret, threatening to tell the king about his daughter's attempt to strangle herself. But if she were told about the love affair, she promised to lend her assistance. Myrrh lifted her head. The tears welling from her eyes rained down upon the nurse's breast. Often the girl tried to confess her shame, but each time she checked herself and hid her face in confusion in her robes. All she would say was, "Lucky indeed is my mother to have such a husband." And then she sighed. A cold shudder ran over the nurse's limbs and shook her to the very marrow, for she had guessed the truth. Her white hair bristled and stood on end all over her head, and she proceeded to admonish the girl at length, to rid her if she could of a love so disastrous. But the other, though she knew that her nurse's warnings were right, was yet resolved to die if she might not satisfy her love. "No," said the nurse, "go on living. You shall have your—" Not daring to utter the word father, she fell silent, and sealed her promises by calling heaven to be her witness. Now the time was come when all married women were duly celebrating the annual festival of Ceres, at which, dressed in garments of snowy white, they offer her garlands made of corn ears, the first fruits of the crop, and for 9 nights hold love and all male contact in the category of forbidden things. The king's wife, Cyparissis, was there with the rest, taking part in the secret rites. So while the king's bed was empty of its lawful occupant, the nurse, with misguided eagerness, waiting until Cyparissis was drowsy with wine, told him of the girl who was in love with him, altering nothing but her name, and praising her beauty. Asked how old the girl was. "The same age as Myrrh," she said. Then the king bade her bring the girl to him. The nurse went home and cried to Myrrh, "Rejoice, my darling, we have won." The joy felt by the unhappy princess was not wholehearted, for she had a presentiment of evil that made her uneasy. Still, her mind was so much at variance with itself that she did feel joy as well. It was the time when all things are silent, and Butes had guided his wagon by means of its slanting pole in between the bears. Myrrh set out to perform her guilty deed. The golden moon fled from the sky. Black clouds concealed the stars as they shrank from sight. Night was robbed of its starry fires, Cyparissis being the first to cover up his face, and Erigone raised to heaven by her devoted love to her father. 3 times an unlucky stumble checked Myrrh's steps. 3 times the funereal screech owl gave its ominous warning with fatal croaking, but still she went on, and the darkness and shadows of the night lessened her feeling of shame. With her left hand she clung to her nurse. With the other she groped her way along a road she could not see. Now she reached the threshold of Cyparissis' bedchamber. Now she opened the door and was led inside. Her trembling knees refused to support her. The color left her face as the blood drained from her cheeks. Her senses were reeling as she went. The nearer she came to the scene of her crime, the more horrified she was, repentant of her rash behavior, and anxious to be able to go back while she was still unrecognized. As she hesitated, the old nurse took her by her hand and led her up close to the king's high couch, handing the girl over to him. "Take her, Cyparissis," she said. "She is yours." And she left the doomed pair together. The father welcomed his own flesh and blood into that bed of horror, and soothed her girlish fears, and encouraged her when she was afraid. It may well be that he used the name appropriate to her age, and called her daughter, while she called him father, so that even the names were not wanting to complete their wickedness. When she had been filled with her father's seed, Myrrh left his room, bearing in her disgusting womb a sinful burden, the child she had criminally conceived. The next night they repeated their wickedness, nor was that the end of it. till at length Cyparissis, anxious to know the mistress with whom he had lain so often, brought in a lamp, recognized his daughter, and realized his guilt. Filled with anger too great for words, he snatched his gleaming sword from the sheath where it hung. Myrrh fled. In the darkness and concealment which night offered, she was saved from death. This way and that she roamed across the broad lands of her father's kingdom, till she left the palm trees of Arabia and Panchaya's fields behind her. For 9 months she wandered, and at length, tired out, rested in the land of Sabea. By this time she was scarcely able to support the burden she carried in her womb. Afraid of death, yet sick of life, not knowing what to pray for, she had recourse to these petitions. O gods, if such there be, who listen to a penitent, I have deserved grievous punishment, nor do I shrink from it. But in case I should contaminate the living by my presence if I live, or the dead if I die, banish me from the realms of both, and deny me life and death by changing me into some other form. There is a deity who hears the prayers of penitents, for certainly her last prayer did not fall on deaf ears. Earth heaped itself around her legs as she spoke, and roots breaking out through her toenails stretched sideways, forming foundations for a tall trunk. Her bones were changed into hard wood, and through the marrow which survived in their interior flowed sap instead of blood. Her arms became large branches, her fingers smaller ones, and her skin hardened into bark. The growing tree had already encased her laden womb, had spread over her breast, and was about to cover up her neck. Impatient of delay, she sank down to meet the wood as it rose, and buried her face in the bark. Though she lost her former feelings when she lost her body, yet still she weeps, and warm drops flow from the tree. Even her tears are removed, and the myrrh that drips from her trunk retains its mistress' name. Men will speak of it to all eternity. The infant that Myrrh had conceived in sin had grown inside the tree, and was now seeking some way by which it may leave its mother and thrust itself into the outer world. Within the tree trunk, Myrrh's womb was swollen and distended with the burden she carried, but her agony found no expression in words, nor could she, in her labor, summon Lucina by her cries. Yet she had all the appearance of a woman struggling to be delivered. The tree bent over, uttered constant moans, and was moist with falling tears. Gentle Lucina stood by the suffering branches, and laying her hand upon them spoke the words of deliverance. At this the trunk split open, and through the fissure in the bark gave up its living burden. The wailing cry of a baby was heard. The nymphs laid him on the soft turf, and washed him in his mother's tears. Even jealousy personified would have praised his beauty, for he looked like one of the naked cupids painted in pictures, differing from them only in his attire, for to make them alike, the one would have to be given a light quiver, or the others would have to relinquish theirs. The fleeting years glide on unnoticed, and nothing is swifter than time. This baby, offspring of his sister and his grandfather, so recently enclosed in the tree trunk, born but yesterday, soon grew into a lovely child, soon became a young man, and then a full-grown man, surpassing even himself in handsomeness. He now became the darling of Venus, and avenged the passion which had assailed his mother. For, while her son Cupid was kissing Venus, with his quiver on his shoulders, he unwittingly grazed her breast with an arrow which was projecting from the sheath. The injured goddess pushed her son away. The wound was deeper than it seemed, deeper than she herself at first realized. The goddess of Cythera, captivated by the beauty of a mortal, cared no more for her seashores, ceased to visit sea-girt Paphos, Cnidos rich in fishes, or Amathus with its valuable ores. She even stayed away from heaven, preferring Adonis to the sky. She used to hold him in her arms and became his constant companion. Though she had always before been accustomed to idle in the shade, devoting all her attention to enhancing her beauty, now she roamed the ridges and woods and tree-clad rocks, her garments caught up as high as her knees, just as Diana wears hers, shouting encouragement to the dogs, and pursuing such animals as it is safe to hunt, fleeing hares, deer, or stags with lofty antlers. She kept clear of sturdy wild boars, and did not risk any encounter with thieving wolves, bears armed with claws, or lions that glut themselves on slain cattle. Hoping that her warnings might be of some avail, she advised Adonis too to beware of such creatures. "Show yourself bold when your quarry flees," she told him. "It is not safe to be daring when the animal you are hunting is daring too. Do not be rash, dear boy, when I may be the one to suffer. Do not provoke wild animals which nature has armed against you, lest your desire for glory should cost me dear. Your youth and beauty, the charms which make Venus love you, have no effect upon lions or bristling boars, or on the eyes and minds of other wild beasts. The fierce boar deals a blow with his fangs, as swift as a lightning flash, and tawny lions filled with boundless rage are ever ready to attack. I hate their whole tribe." Book 10, line 708. Thus the goddess warned, and through the air, drawn by her swans, she took her way, but the boy's manly courage would not brook advice. By chance his hounds came upon a well-marked trail, and following the scent roused a wild boar from its lair. As it was about to emerge from the woods, the young grandson of Cyparissis pierced its side with a slanting blow. Immediately the fierce boar dislodged the blood-stained spear with the help of its crooked snout, and then pursued the panic-stricken huntsman as he was making for safety. It sank its teeth deep in his groin, bringing him down, mortally wounded, on the yellow sand. Venus, as she drove through the air in her light chariot drawn by winged swans, had not yet reached Cyprus. She recognized the groans of the dying Adonis from far, and turned her white birds in his direction. As she looked down from on high, she saw him, lying lifeless, his limbs still writhing in his own blood. Leaping down from her car, she tore at her bosom and at her hair, beat her breast with hands never meant for such a use, and reproached the fates. But still she cried, "You will not have everything under your absolute sway. There will be an everlasting token of my grief, Adonis. Every year, when the scene of your death will be staged anew, lamented with wailing cries, an imitation of those cries of mine, but your blood will be changed into a flower. Persephone was once allowed to change a woman's body into fragrant mint. Shall I begrudge the right to transform Cyparissis' brave grandson?" With these words, she sprinkled Adonis' blood with sweet-smelling nectar, and at the touch of the liquid, the blood swelled up just as clear bubbles rise in yellow mud. Within an hour a flower sprang up the color of blood, and in appearance like that of the pomegranate, the fruit which conceals its seeds under a leathery skin. But the enjoyment of this flower is of brief duration, for it is so fragile, its petals so lightly attached, that it quickly falls shaken from its stem by those same winds that give it its name, Anemone.